And we are live with the episode 2 of CEO Unboxed. It is a very exciting episode where we talk to Caya, who is the storyteller himself, a founder and CEO of Slidebean, a digital animator and filmmaker in the past, turned the craft to a startup journey and amazing company that is now helping tens of thousands of founders fundraise. And it's an amazing example of resilience and perseverance as immigrant founder, and exactly the kind of stories we want to be sharing at CEO Unboxed. Stories that are raw, that are unfiltered, and always real. I'm excited to welcome Caya to the show.
Excited to be in the show, Vlada. Thanks a lot for having me.
Fantastic. Well, welcome to the pod. We have so much to talk about, and I think that the first place I want to start from is the beginning. So you grew up in Costa Rica and made it all the way to a vibrant New York scene. So tell me about some of your early experiences growing up and what inspired you perhaps to be an entrepreneur, if that's something you thought is even possible.
No, I really don't think that I set out to be an entrepreneur, and I think that that I think that's an interesting part of a founder's journey. I think that great companies and great products are usually built because this itch to solve a problem or this itch to kind of tackle this business opportunity comes from an actual work, traditional, maybe 9 to 5, or maybe less traditional job experience. Sort of, you discover problems through experience, and once you have a network or have an understanding of the market or understand what it's all about, that's when you kind of go out and set out a business. So that's not to trash on who consider themselves natural born entrepreneurs, because I do think that there is a innate willingness that not everybody's willing to tackle on that risk. So not for everyone. Yes, maybe some genetics involved as to who can have the grit to run a company. But again, the motivation, or so, like the final piece of the puzzle, I do think that it comes from an actual more traditional job experience.
Yeah, that's a great point of contention or conversation, right? Some folks say, well, I've been building businesses when I was 7 years old, 10 years old, right? I was selling something. I was cleaning up the front yard of some neighbors and whatnot, and others just stumbled upon a problem that they've personally experienced and felt compelled enough to jump in with 2 feet. And sounds like that's been your journey to solve a specific problem you've encountered. And if we think about culturally, right, you come with a very rich background, and you came as an immigrant founder. I'm curious, what are some of those perhaps cultural heritage aspects that you brought with you that you think are unique or different from what you've seen in other leaders and CEOs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there's this weird, some would say magical, some would say catastrophic combination of factors that make the U.S. such an entrepreneurial country, right? So immigrants, I guess we make up part of that, but also just the the American dream, but also this as utopic as that might seem. But I think that connects even more to, say, work culture. People in the U.S. work really freaking hard. And there's this. I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's necessarily something that needs to be celebrated. It is just an aspect of how the U.S. operates that is somewhat foreign to me as a Costa Rican, right? Like I grew up with with Social Security and with health insurance, for universal health insurance, with very strict hours, legislation on not overworking people and none of that stuff. So, seeing the US as it operates, I understand why, from this external view, I think I understand why it's such a fantastic cooking pot for so many products and companies and entrepreneurs. I understand how, when you have to build a company, you sort of have to adapt a little bit to that. And if you were to build a company at a non-US pace, I think your chances of success would be slimmer. Um, so yeah, I think that we bring, and all immigrant entrepreneurs sort of try to bring a little bit of their own culture, a little bit of their own life experience into the job. In my case, I think that that's one where even our US based team usually operates on such a different speed and with such different expectations of what a job entails. Same as our Costa Rica team, which I'm not saying Costa Rica is that relaxed, because I don't think it is, but our Costa Rica team does expect a little bit of overperforming, or a little bit of us, on the other hand, adapting to a faster pace.
Got it. So sounds like you had to adapt to build a company at a pace that's required by the market. But at the same time, this was something that was foreign to you initially, right? That was one of those aspects that is perhaps a combination of US culture, but also startup culture blended together.
Yeah.
Understood. And some other aspects, Caya, in, I don't know, the way people form relationships, or the way you were able to connect with folks. What other aspects perhaps surprised you, or where you had to sort of bend to blend in?
Yeah. I think that from a job and from sort of like a team building aspect, I think that us Costa Ricans are much warmer people, and I think that does extend a little bit to the work environment, compared to kind of at least in my perception, colder, more transactional, sometimes more distant relationship with sort of like in a US based office space. Again, as a foreigner, this is not my experience, just my perception, right? But yeah, so I do think that has had an influence. Again, I think we have the advantage of sort of like being able to see both cases, take what we like, take what we don't out of each one, and I think create a pretty cool work environment.
Absolutely. I think I've seen some of the glimpse of it in your videos, and it seems like a really welcoming and warm environment that you were able to create. And I'm curious whether you think that some of these differences, for example, building a relationship as a startup CEO entrepreneur, it's key, right? It's one of those key skills, whether you build them internally with your team, or partners, or customers, or investors, or the list goes on, right? It's all about people. Do you think that sort of having that cultural heritage was an asset and something that gave you a leg up on perhaps some American folks, or was it just something that you had to overcome or stabilize to be kind of at the same?
Yeah. When it comes to selling or marketing, or finding customers, right, in whichever form you choose to do so, I do think that there's a barrier, like there's a foreigner barrier that has to be overcome. In our case, I think we have, I mean, this is all to say that I think that any immigrant will be at a disadvantage in terms of sales if they're the ones having to lead the sales team, or lead the marketing team, etc. Why? Because you sort of have to adapt to the way people do business, to the way people purchase things, to the way people pay. I learned the other day that, for example, in this was a sales pitch by some subscription company, but I learned the other day that most people in Germany, for example, just don't like using their credit cards to buy things. They're much more prone to using PayPal. Or when my first company, which was this mobile gaming app, we discovered that people in the US were always willing to sign up with Facebook. So for a while we only had that option as an alternative to sign up to the platform, because this was back in the day. It's not recent, but 10 years ago. But yeah, just sign up with Facebook was just a normal standard that everybody would, in our minds, would be okay with. But when you took that model to Europe, that was a huge barrier, right? People don't want to sign up with Facebook. People want to provide as little information as possible. So those little cultural differences, you sort of had to learn the hard way to overcome. When you're doing marketing or when you're leading marketing efforts, those little nuances may not be that obvious until you sort of look at the data, right, and realize that something you thought would be okay wasn't.
Right.
Yeah, again, so I think that everybody who comes in as a foreigner to a new market has that disadvantage. I guess a silver lining in our case is that Costa Rica is such a small country that we are inevitably influenced by U.S. culture, mostly probably more influenced by U.S. culture than by any other culture around, even Mexico, which is probably the second largest population around us. But same applies the other way around, right? So if you grew up in a large country, sort of understanding the cultural nuances of another large country are much harder because there's enough culture in-house to go around.
Absolutely. And I think when we spoke before the interviews, you said something really profound and something I actually didn't think about before that conversation. And you said that as an immigrant founder, you are starting off not only a company from scratch, you're starting your whole network from scratch. Everything is from scratch. And it certainly was true for me as well, right? Coming from Ukraine. But I never thought of it this way. Thankfully, maybe I wouldn't have started if I thought about all this from scratch experience that I had to go through. So tell me about sort of your first steps. How did you go about building this network? I think this is something actually that holds back a lot of founders who actually think of themselves as immigrant founders, even if, let's say, their company is registered in the US and they're saying, how do I break into US market as an immigrant founder, right? As opposed to a founder that wants to solve a problem, right? So I think that is a big challenge. So tell me more about early experiences.
Yeah, so probably network is the other massive aspect of this. Because when and where do you build network, right? You build network with the people that you meet, with your second degree connections, your friends and acquaintances. You build network in college, and through the people you meet there, you build a network at your job. And if you're moving elsewhere, then you are basically starting from scratch. I think that for a startup, that's a problem. That's big. That's a big risk. In the end, we work a lot with founders who are trying to raise money, and this is kind of like a typical thing we see, right? They're a foreign founder, or they don't even need to be a foreign founder. They're foreign to the startup world, into the startup ecosystem, right?
Right.
They grew up in a smaller town. They didn't grow up in New York, San Francisco. So so they're coming into these meetings, or they're coming into these ecosystems a bit like a foreigner, which is a disadvantage. I think investors who might invest in this company see that as a risk. It's like, well, they found me, but I don't know how lucky they'll get at finding other investors as well. That's a disadvantage, of course. Whereas the founder that grew up surrounded by other large companies, probably worked at some of them, has a good network of people that can fund their business, and that it can introduce them to people that can continue to fund their business. Speaking only on the fundraising side, that extends to recruiting, to building a team, and to finding customers. So yes, I think in our case, accelerators were a big bridge to this, and I think that accelerators. There was a bit of an accelerator bubble. We're making a video about it, but yeah, the 2010s accelerator bubble burst a little bit because these companies were too early. But we sort of rode that wave, or I rode that wave with a couple of with the different companies that I started, and accelerators were a necessary. I don't want to say necessary evil, but necessary equity that I had to shed to sort of fast forward my way to building a network for either company, because otherwise that would have taken months or years, if possible at all.
Yes, that's certainly very true, and I think that as someone who comes in without a network, I think accelerators today it still can be a good springboard, right, to get into those communities and get into those rooms. And so, if we talk about sort of biases in fundraising, right, there is obviously a lot of talk about founders who don't look like majority of the investors, whether based on gender, based on other characteristics. Um, have uh, have a disadvantage when fundraising. Is that something you've experienced as well, or what's your stance on sort of the selectivity of investors?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic, and it's always very delicate to be addressed, because my upbringing experience did not carry so much of the baggage that the upbringing experience in the US has for uh, foreign founders, or for foreigners, or for people of color, or for minorities in general. Like, I didn't experience anything like that growing up. I think Costa Rica, luckily, is a country where that is less of an issue, not to say not an issue at all. So those topics and those problems and those issues, like race, new information for me as I've become an adult, and as I've spent more time in the U.S. Or following the U.S. News cycle. That's an issue that I didn't really care about for the first 20 years of my life. It wasn't a problem for me. Uh, I'm thankful for that. But now, looking at it from an external point of view, um, yeah, like, of course, I see how there's that division, and that huge gap that happens, that's historical, that has all this historical baggage and so on. Um, but when it comes to building companies, I don't think I've ever experienced a disadvantage for being outside of the norm, outside the stuff that I've mentioned, right? The stuff that, yes, I have a smaller network, I have to deal with that. But yeah, I don't think that I don't feel like the startup ecosystem is like that. Maybe I've been rejected for that reason. I just didn't know. But I feel that underrepresentation in people starting companies, or minorities starting companies. I mean, it's a good press headline, but more importantly, much of that is simply a reflection of another bigger issue, right? It's not that the investors don't want to invest in people who don't look like them. I feel it's more that those people are probably, if they have more resources, or if they didn't go through school, or the league school, they're just prone to have a company that succeeds, right? It's not the investor's fault. It's not the startup community's fault. It is simply baggage from a lot of socioeconomic issues, way beyond what us founders can do about.
Yeah, absolutely. I I completely share your sentiment, and I think every time I'm personally asked that question, I always say I like to worry about what I can control, and should there are biases, that's something outside of my control when it comes to me fundraising or me making those connections. But what I can control is obviously making an effort to build those connections, keep in touch with them, right, and just knowing what are some of the general things that maybe based on nature women are better at or men are better at, and how to lean into different things to ultimately help myself and the company succeed in
Mhm,
that way.
mhm.
I wanted to go back, Kaya, to the experience, to the early experience of Slidebean. And by the way, I'm curious how many millions and maybe billions at this point of dollars were raised using your slides. Do you have a stat like that?
Honestly, not a lot of these pitch decks. A lot of companies raise money, and we don't get to know
Right,
about
you
it. We don't get
don't.
to hear about it. But yeah, it must be in the $500 million at least, from what uh we looked at. Yeah, and we like to take credit, and it's a good marketing line for our
Right.
websites and so on. But in the end, what does a pitch deck do to raise around? It just summarizes a fantastic company. If it's a fantastic company, pitch deck can hurt it, but no will raise it money. So it's a journey sort of helping these. When we started Slidebean, our initial thinking was these founders are design and big motivation. Can we build a better design tool? Can we build a simpler, more straightforward design approach? But with time, what we discovered is that really the struggle is beyond just design. Like, I think that was an oversimplification. It's a storytelling question, and not everybody's great at storytelling. And we, a little bit by coincidence, are. So we sort of double down on.
That certainly is very true, and I've seen some of your recent releases with plugging in ChatGPT to really help with the design aspects and telling that story faster and even more impactfully, which is certainly a great use case for AI.
Yeah, and it's funny because I don't think we expected to see AI solve that. I think the first time we brought on AI, some artificial intelligence into the platform, we built this genetic algorithm that would design the slide for you. Again, thinking that the problem was design, right? So we would, take an algorithm that would scan the slide, find what the best layout for a slide would be, and try to kind of get every slide into that state. Early artificial intelligence, not as complex as it sounds. But and then when we released this feature, this was probably 2017, 2018. And I don't think that we could ever dream that we would have like a simple API that you could plug in and build a pitch deck automatically. Because because we thought that problem was a human problem. I think it still is for them. I mean, I think it still is. I think that GPT-4, as good as it is, and as decent as a deck as it can build with very little context, uh, I think that it still isn't perfect. I think that you can still tell if you're reading a GPT, especially if it's not a well trained version of it. But yeah, we didn't dream that we could so simply with the technology that's not even ours, right? That's widely available. Help people write better stories about their companies. And I can think that that's one of the exciting in tech. You are at the forefront of those sort of discoveries.
Yes, absolutely. And certainly beyond lacking money, a lot of founders lack time. So certainly that seems like a much needed part of the solution here, for
Mhm.
sure. Um, I Another area, Kai, I wanted to talk to you about it. From what I've observed about your journey, you started in these accelerators and even raised money from investors for a different business than you pivoted into, and that's a really gut wrenching decision uh, to to take that leap. So I would love to go back to those days if you can.
Yeah. I mean, pivoting a product is a. I think we made a video about this a couple years ago. Um, there's this mixed message with what to do next, right? Because a lot of messaging around being an entrepreneur goes along the lines of the motivational message of, hey, like, don't give up, keep trying, persevere, right? And a lot of basic motivational quotes and videos
Okay.
and whatever kind of go in that direction. But pivoting is giving up. Pivoting is accepting that you were wrong about something. And um, I'm stealing this quote from someone, I don't know who, but a startup is the number of pivots that you can afford, or the number of pivots. It's a race against the number of pivots that you can make before you run out of money. And that's just the truth, right? So it's it's a bit of a balance of, yeah, not giving up. Yes, there's a very mental motivation, rough aspect of getting your pitch rejected every single time, or getting your product rejected by customers, or seeing churn on your stats, and you have to live with that and adapt to it. But at the same time, you sort of have to get to a point where you say, well, this isn't working, and we've tried, and it's not going to work. We have to do something different. So it is a very delicate balance. Sometimes it is tough to sort of zoom out of your day to day, or the pressure of just keeping revenue, or the pressure of running out of money, or the amount of months of runway that you have, and to zoom out of that for a second and say, hey, like, is this really the right approach on what we're doing? Um, and so I think pivots are great. I think we should be careful, of pivoting too soon, but at the same time, be extra careful of pivoting too late.
And how did you decide when was not too soon, but not too late
Oh,
to
I think in hindsight, I think that it has just taken us too long to pivot every single time. I think that, again, in hindsight, all the signs were there that when we were doing something that wasn't working, all the signs were there. You can build like a little denial curtain around it, and justify the metrics, but the metrics are the metrics, and if things aren't working, you should do something different about it. Also, as I think that one fantastic thing about startups, and about early stage teams, is that, and honestly, a little bit about kind of working in the same place, because that isn't always replicated when you're working remotely. But there's this fantastic thing of the early journey, which is, if you're in a small organization of 3-4 people, you can pivot really quickly. You can change directions really, really quickly. uh, this lean startup cycle of build, measure, learn, right? You can do these rotation cycles very, very quickly. I think that as teams get bigger, and I've noticed and struggled with this a little bit. As teams get bigger, there is a bureaucracy factor to communication. There is I think remote work, as much as I like remote work, and as much as I think that it's a step forward, I think that sometimes cripples that process a little bit, right? When you have 5 people sitting in the same room, uh, drawing ideas on sketches and whiteboards, it's very different, that type of interaction compared to what happens remotely. So I think, and again, as teams get bigger, maybe sometimes someone's out on holiday, maybe someone is working from home that day, and that slows things down slowly but surely. Again, as teams get bigger, you have to sort of have middle level management people who communicate between one team or the other, rather than just going directly to the person. There's project management involved, and all that slows things down. I remember making fun of how slow, like, these enterprise, like, I have a good friend of mine that works at Google, and he would complain all the time, and he would tell me about all the bureaucracy and all the steps that you have to go through to get a feature approved. And for the longest time, I'm like, that's just idiotic. But as I've grown older and I've run a company for long enough, you see that that's just the natural direction. That there's very little that you can do about it to keep moving faster. So that quick iteration time is probably one of the most exciting times of building a company.
Yeah, I agree with that. And another, I think, somewhat controversial topic is raising substantial funding early, because then you go and you hire a big team, and so you effectively are already affected by that bureaucracy because you have more people to manage, and pivoting in those conditions becomes substantially harder. And so as a result, you have a longer runway, but you also wait too long, and so you burn through a lot more capital as a result, should you need to pivot and substantially change direction for the business.
Yeah, and I think that inevitably people, when you're dealing with a larger group of people, uh, there's this extra fear on the team that there's a hidden agenda, or that there's something that they're not telling, or there's not gossip, but there's a kind of like conversations between the team that maybe get them more concerned about one topic or the other, or about one direction that the company's taking. When you're in a small, again, 5-10 people organization, there's none of that. Like, everybody is there in the same room. Like, it's much more direct to get a message across. and there are no barriers and no walls and no authority differences, right? So that's something that's very real as you operate with larger teams and with people who think differently or who have different priorities in life, and you have to account for all of that. And it is, I don't want to say a distraction, because I don't think it is, but it is a job that needs to be done along with the job of building a company and a product.
Absolutely. And so your main customers are startups, is that right?
Our main companies are startups, yes.
And so there are obviously a lot of folks that are trying to sell to startups in different areas, right? Different software companies and whatnot. I'm curious, sort of what have been some effective ways that you guys went about selling to startups? Looks like YouTube is huge, and you've been just a fascinating storyteller, championing that channel for you. Um, has that been a big part of sort of your growth, or other areas that you've seen effective?
Yeah, YouTube has been a fantastic experience, one that happened very much by accident for us, as we, as a marketer does, you sort of experiment. You throw spaghetti at the wall, see what sticks. You have to experiment with different sales channels and marketing channels and try to get people to convert. So, we went all the way from podcasts to emails to sponsoring newsletters to one day, hey, like, why don't we try YouTube and see what happens? I think that we got particularly lucky that when we first started doing YouTube, two members of the team who were absolutely not hired to do video had a background in production. So they sort of spearheaded the first few videos, which cost us nothing extra, right? Like, these were people who we were carving out for little bits of time to help us, edit the videos and work on what we're doing. So that was a very lucky circumstance that happened to us, that allowed us to kind of start the channel and fail. We failed miserably at YouTube for a couple of years with really bad videos that nobody would watch. But 2 years later, we had understood enough about YouTube so that we finally started hitting it off. And again, we didn't have to really pay a big
Price.
amount of money, a big
Right.
price to reach that. And I think on YouTube today, it is absolutely a moat, right? Any company that looks to start a YouTube channel today has to go through that learning cycle, and it's going to be an expensive learning cycle. It's going to cost them money, or they can bring somebody experienced, and even if they do, it takes a while to sort of find an audience and find who that audience, a content that audience cares about. So, fast forward from those experiment times, yeah, YouTube now is not only one of my favorite parts of my job, but also a huge source of brand awareness and customers. One challenge with startups and selling to startups, especially early stage companies like we do, is that economics on what they're on what they can afford are not great, right? We can't charge thousands of dollars for our product. We can't, because these are early stage companies that are just starting up, and they're careful about capital. So if we can get them as cheap as we do, that represents a huge advantage for us.
Yeah, that is very smart. But something you said I just wanted to highlight is that you said YouTube worked for you, and so you doubled down. But before it worked, it took you 2 years, right? So certainly your resilience and patience with iteration for 2 years, perhaps many other founders would have said, well, YouTube doesn't work for us. Let's move on to
Mhm,
50 other
mhm,
things.
mhm,
So
mhm.
I think that's kind of back to this question of pivoting, but here on the channel side, right? Sort of that you felt that there is something there, and you kept pushing on that idea. So
Yeah,
certainly,
and that's very much a um, yeah. I think that if we would have done YouTube the way most companies would have, we would have given up on it, or we should have given up on it earlier. I think, again, that's why I always say, like, I'm a bit of an accidental YouTuber, because it was this weird combination of aspects that got us there. Uh, I think the decision to pivot out of YouTube should have happened sooner. It was just fun for us, honestly, and cheap. It wasn't that expensive an experiment. It was a bit of like that sort of like Google policy, like the 80-20%, like 80% do your job, 20% do creative stuff. Like YouTube was our 20% for me and for many people on the team for a while, and because of that, it was okay.
Wonderful. And perhaps it's also a cool team building exercise to do this creative work together
Yeah,
as a
and you
team.
can't always, honestly, you don't always have the time. You can't always afford to carve out the team to do stuff like that. Um, but you know, and I can't say that it 100% of the time it will pay off. For most times we've tried stuff like that, it hasn't paid off. But YouTube is a bit of an exception.
Are there other accidental things that you're doing that other folks might not know about?
I mean, YouTube's probably the sexiest one.
And you
I
guys
think
are
we,
approaching 500,000 subscribers. Is that right?
yeah, coming on the half a mil. Yes, um,
Congrats.
a bit. Um, yeah, like I think SEO is probably another one. When we started doing SEO for Slidebean, we had no web presence, or not. I mean, not presence in Google search. Um, Maybe getting 10,000 visits a month to the website. Very little. And we came out of that cycle of that process with some 400 and some thousand monthly hits on the website. Um, I wouldn't say an accident. Much more deliberate, but honestly, never expected the how much it would pay off through the years. Right. This is a sprint. A 6-9 month sprint that we did long ago. This must have been like 2016, 17. But we still reap a lot of the benefits of that effort. Um, yeah.
That's very cool. And I think that's another point about sort of playing a long game, right? As opposed to saying, how can I boost my next month's result, right? You can't really boost your next month's result with SEO, but you
Exactly.
can boost your next year's result with SEO, right?
Yeah.
And so having this longer time horizon, which is on the one hand really hard to do, but so critical to build a sustainable business, right?
hmm Yeah, and I think that's sometimes a confusion. I think in my experience, what has worked out has been, hey, focus on stuff that creates impact right away. Like sometimes you just, if you have 6 months of runway or 9 months of runway, you can't wait for SEO. You can't. It's not going to kick in time. So focus 80%, 9% of your effort on stuff that will impact your revenue now. Why? Because that allows you to raise more money or to become profitable and be able to fund these other experiments. And then use the 10 or the 15 or the 20% of time, for this maybe useful long game. Sometimes those long games are funnier, like I mean, are more exciting than the short games, right? Running paid marketing and just getting conversions out of that it's money. It's I guess it's fun to see the money come in, but it is just a very mechanical, sort of like not that creative aspect of just running an ad campaign. Whereas YouTube is exciting and creative, and it gets our creative juices going. So I think a balance of the two is always important. Um, as a founder, you sort of have to understand that sometimes you have to do the less cool stuff so that you can fund the cooler stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And so just wrapping up here and thinking about just your personal growth, right? Through all the pivots and waiting 2 years for YouTube to work, and for having the courage to call shots and say, hey, we are doing something else, right? And leading the team. How do you recover? How do you get back to your best self after being hit in the face by whatever startup throw?
Yeah, I mean, I remember always saying that fundraising is the shittiest job you have to do as a founder. Maybe it still is because of just the work of getting rejected, just a work of not begging, but asking people for money is not. It's not a. favorite thing to do, compared to, say, like giving people something that they want to pay for because it's really valuable to them. Yeah, so that's very draining. Dealing with runway is very draining. I think that it's a cliche a little bit, and I'm stealing this from someone, but building a company is very much a marathon rather than a sprint. So you do have to mentalize yourself to play that long game. You have to understand that you can sprint sometimes, but you will get tired, and that'll cost you in the end. Yeah, so again, going back to the beginning of our conversation on that work-life balance and kind of like the amount of work coming from one or the other, like I've gotten more strict about my time off as I've grown older, and as I've spent more time working with Slidebean. I usually don't touch my laptop on the weekends, and it'd be a big exception if I did. I usually log off at 6 or 7 p.m., which is still, I mean, it's late. It's not it's not an 8-hour shift, but it allows kind of like that breathing room. I don't like sleeping too much. I'm the type of person that prefers not to sleep fewer hours, so that I have more hours available awake to do more things, because the day isn't enough for me. Again, it's not necessarily work. It's the movie I want to watch, or the series, or the PS game I want to win, I want to beat. But I've discovered, sadly, that my brain just works a lot better when it's well rested, or when I don't work. So sometimes I want to finish a project that I'm working on, or I want to finish this feature because I think it's going to have a big revenue impact, and I think it's going to do a big deal, or this video that we're producing that it's going to blow up, and I want to work harder, I want to finish it, and I'm willing, and I want to pull an all-nighter and finish it up. Sometimes I will, but in the end, when I don't, next week, some random idea comes up simply because you're well rested and because you took a break. I hate that. I hate it because I wish I was efficient, and I could pull in the hours that I want, but that's just not how brains work.
Yes, absolutely. It's when they say work harder, work smarter, not harder, right? That there is a reason for that, right? Because I am finding the same thing, is that you just can do mechanical work, but you're not at your top performance if you're really tired. Well, I think the last thing Kaya wanted to ask you is, what is perhaps your advice to founders who are just in their, let's say, year one of their company?
Yeah, a little from the lessons learned, the mistakes we made. Understand that fundraising is just a means to an end. It's not the end game. I think that press and general startup conversation make it seem like fundraising is the end goal, but no, it is just a means to an end. So I think that founders are more likely to party if they raise a round versus I don't know, versus hitting some revenue milestone. But it is the revenue milestone, the one that's much more impactful long term. So yeah, like don't focus too much on fundraising. I know it's tough. I know it's running out of money, and the prospect of running out of money is a stress that you have to get rid of for you and for your rest of your team, also to be able to work more efficiently. But it is not the end game. And then again, echoing what I just said, just prepare yourself for a very long game, and be ready to tackle the new challenges that will arise at every step of the way.
Well, I'm hopeful that startup founders are hearing this, and they're prepared for the long game, and know that it all works out at the end, one way or the other, with this startup or next. But the main part of startup founders' journey is resilience, and ultimately health, right? And I think that people need to know that it's all life and work comes in one package. So thank you, Caya, very much. I think we have our CEO Unboxed here. And I wish you all a great day, guys. Thank you for tuning in.
Thanks a lot for having me, Lana.